Hello. When I last left you, I was talking about the navigation systems of moths, and because of that, we'll continue on with basically the anatomy and physiology of moths and butterflies and skippers. So, alright, think of a butterfly. What do you think of? It's out during the day. What does it eat on? Flowers. Okay. Everyone knows this about butterflies. To differentiate between a butterfly, a moth, and a skipper, there are some very general rules. And the rules are pretty easy to follow, and although it's not always the case and there are exceptions to the rules, if you follow the guidelines, it's pretty easy to tell what's a moth, what's a skipper, and what's a butterfly. Most people think butterflies active during the day, very colorful, yay, everyone loves them, you know, they're the pretty ones, whereas moths are these nocturnal, drab, violent, light-seeking, crazy, neurotic, moth to the flame type weird things, and that's not true. And so I explained to you why moths are attracted to light, and now we'll explain to you how the rules about Lepidoptera, or moths, butterflies, and skippers, is not necessarily true. So you can tell a butterfly is a butterfly, and a moth is a moth, and a skipper is a skipper by basically 3 rules. And the rules are this. A butterfly will hold its wings upright, so 90 degrees. So when it's resting on a flower or on a perch, it will have its wings upright. You've seen it before. You've seen it in the photos. You've seen it in National Geographic. You've seen it in your backyard. Everyone knows that butterflies, they rest with their wings up. And that's a major determining factor on whether you're looking at a moth, a butterfly, or a skipper. Also, butterflies have differently shaped antennae than moths and even skippers sometimes. Again, these are all basic rules, and there are exceptions to the rules, but for the amateur entomologist or amateur enthusiast or amateur everyday person, let's just stick to these rules without getting into jargon and entomology debates and stuff about that. So butterflies hold their wings upright, 90 degrees. Skippers, which are also a lot like butterflies, and in ways similar to moths, hold their wings at 45 degrees. So they're quite small, usually less than an inch long, maybe 40 millimeters wingspan. You know, they're quite little small. You see them on the flowers. They also drink nectar through proboscis, much like a lot of moths do as well. They have clubbed antennae, like the butterflies. And so butterflies and skippers have clubbed antennae, and their antennae go forward, and then instead of feathering out and being like moth antennae, they have little skinny antennae, and then it widens and becomes fat at the end into club shapes. Skippers and butterflies have that in common. The difference between a skipper and a butterfly is how they hold their wings. Also, skippers are a little bit fatter, and so their bodies look like moths, and they're a little bit hairier around the head and the abdomen and the thorax, and because of that, a lot of people can confuse them for moths. The other rule that we were just talking about is that a lot of people assume that all moths are nocturnal, and that's not the case. As a matter of fact, there is quite a few day-flying moth species, and there are even more diurnal moths, which are active at dawn and dusk, twilight and early mornings. And so to assume that moths only hide in the night would be wrong. And to assume that moths are drab and uncolorful would also be a generalization and wrong. As a matter of fact, there is several moths that actually are just as beautiful and brightly colored as butterflies. As a matter of fact, they are some of the species that most people confuse for moths and butterflies in between, because they are active during the day and they literally look exactly almost like butterflies. However, moths, the 3 basic rules, and there are exceptions, and the one I'm talking about earlier would be an exception. The 3 basic rules for a moth is this: it has feathered antennae. Moths mate by pheromones. Unlike butterflies, butterflies are active during the day. They have very powerful compound eyes, and with these compound eyes, they're able to see their mates and see their mates' sexual display, usually wing fluttering, you know, stuff like that. They also use pheromones, but just not as much. And because of that, moths mate with mostly their eyes. Butterflies mate with mostly their eyes during the day. They're able to see what they need to do, and they're able to check out local partners, and because they're in the active sunlight, they can see these things, and they can see their predators, and they don't have to worry about being swooped up in the middle of the dark. Moths, on the other hand, they mate through pheromones, and the female produces a pheromone, and the male will pick up the pheromone using his feathery antennae, filamented antennae. And because of this, if you see something which you think is a moth or a butterfly, check for how it holds its wings. Generally, if it's up, it's a butterfly. If it's 45 degrees and they're quite small, that's usually a skipper. And if they're flat or in a tent shape, that's usually a moth. So those are some basic general rules. Look at the antennae. Usually feathered antennae are moths. Clubbed antennae are butterflies or skippers. And the third one is what's called a frenulum, and that's a hooking device on the. It's how the wings hook together, and it's a coupling device that is active in moths and not butterflies, because they fly actually and their wings hold a different way. But that's a lot more technical, and that would be a lot of jargon. So we're not going to go into that too much, but those are the basic rules. And there are some moths which will hold their wings up like a butterfly. Check for the antennae, and there are, exceptions to the rule. Don't be confused by the time of day. Try to look at the physiological and anatomical signs to determine whether or not it's a moth or a butterfly. It's pretty easy to do if you know those three rules. Don't overthink it. Just look at how it holds its wings. Look at its antennae. So that's that. And now I'm going to talk to you about the etymology of the word moth and butterflies. So I talked to you about how butterflies, how moth was motophobia, moth being the German word for maggot or midge, and so that's where moth comes from. Butterfly is used because, believe it or not, in England and in Germany and in the Netherlands, when people were starting to notice and actually document the names of species and animals, they noticed that these certain butterflies came out during the season where they were milking their cows, and so they called them butterflies, because when they were producing butter and milk from their cows, the spring, the butterflies would become active and parent, and they thought that the butterflies actually ate the butter, and because of this, in Lower German, they actually called butterflies butter shitters, and so all of a sudden the butterfly becomes a little bit less elegant in its naming, but butterfly is a lot better than butter shitter or butter thief or butter licker. So we stuck with butterfly, as the English did, and that's why they're called butterflies. Moths were called moth because the Germany moth, and maggot and larvae because moths are generally considered pests, which is not the case. If anything, they're caterpillars, and they are pests, and you can say that a lot of butterfly and moth caterpillars are pests, and so that's the issue there. So we clung on to butterfly, which is pretty, and we clung on to moth, which isn't really that pretty etymologically wise. The history about the naming system. However, whether we like it or not, and whether we notice it or not, actually a lot of Western civilization, America, England, is based off of Roman and Greek mythology. Roman mythology being nothing more than an updated version of Greek mythology. So if actually anything, let's go back to Greek mythology. The Greeks had a word, and as soon as I say this word, you're going to immediately conjure up images in your mind, and you're going to be wrong. So just prepare yourself. Psyche. What is psyche? The human brain. Wrong. No, that's not true. As a matter of fact, we associate the human brain with the psyche because psyche is the Greek word for soul. And in Western civilization, we think the soul somehow resides in our brain. If you believe in the immortal soul or the concept of soul in general. But psyche actually means soul, and psychology and all that stuff is sin for it. However, Psyche was also a goddess, and Psyche was also the Greek word for butterfly or moth. Not just butterfly, but moths as well. And Psyche and butterflies were thought to be the soul. Butterflies and moths were thought to be the soul of the departed coming back in physical form to visit its loved ones. And so moths and butterflies held this very special place in Greek mythology. It was the returning souls of the loved ones and the departed, and it gave you this sense of the afterlife and hope and the immortal soul. And because of this, moths and butterflies, moths in particular, because of phobias and stuff, have been seen as these elegant, beautiful things, and because of that, fascination has grown. But moths also carry this stigma. They were also called Psyche. They were also departed souls coming back to talk to us. Matter of fact, in the Caribbean and in Jamaica, there are certain moths that actually are seen as good luck charms, and that if one lands on you, you're going to win the lottery or come into financial presents and gifts, and so they're thought as lucky charms. And at the same time, there's a lot of moths associated with ominous symbols and death. One in particular, which you might immediately picture in your head, is the Death's Head Moth. And the Death's Head Moth is of a family called Acherontia. And in order to dissect why they're named these things, you actually have to go back to Greek mythology as well. The family is called Acherontia, and Acherontia comes from Acheron, and Acheron was the initial river which led the mortals and the gods and everything to the underworld, to Hades, to Pluto, to, you know, the place where souls departed after life. And Acheron was the river of pain, or woe, or misery, usually to do with emotions. And so, not lamentations, because there was a river of lamentations as well, but pain and suffering. And so Acheron becomes Acherontia, and that becomes the family, and the family of Death's Head moths. And there are three species of Death's Head moths: the Acherontia atropos, the Acherontia styx, and the Acherontia lecanesis. I can never pronounce that one right. I will have to sort it out later, but those are the three species of Death's Head moths. They all have Acherontia in the beginning, Acherontia being that river of woe. And that river of woe leads into the river Styx. And everyone in Greek mythology knows the river Styx, and they don't know the other rivers for some reason. But the river Styx was the one that led into the gates, and that's where Charon, the boat keeper, would take departed souls across the river Styx and through the gate where Cerberus guarded the gates of Hades and the gates of hell, or the gates of the underworld. And so Acherontia Styx is called Acherontia Styx, and so it's named after two of the rivers in the underworld, Styx and Acheron. And River Styx was the river of oath, and so all mortals and immortals and gods and goddesses and everything had to swear this oath to Styx. And Styx was the river which basically, one way or the other, everyone goes through. Not necessarily the gods and goddesses and Olympians, but Styx was kind of this inevitable thing that people had to cross. And because of this, the oath of life and death. And so Acherontia Styx is named after the two rivers in Hades. Acherontia atropos and Acherontia lecanesis are named after two of the three fates. In Greek mythology, in the underworld, there's three fates. And the fates decide things. And they're called the loomers, or the spinners. And in this next video, because I don't want this one to be over 15 minutes in length, like I've attempted this video before, I will tell you about Acherontia atropos and Acherontia lecanesis, and I will talk more about Death's Head moth, and perhaps some cultural issues surrounding moths in general, and a little bit more about my feelings about moths and why I'm fascinated with them. But I hope that this isn't too boring and that you're learning something, and that there's some nugget of, oh, that's cool, that you take from it. You can obviously see that I'm obsessed with moths and insects, and I just, there's beauty in the things that people cast off, so I want you to see that.